Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Drive Safe Long Beach presentation. So, today we will be focusing on impaired driving and getting home safely. So, our program is called Greenlight Long Beach, and we are part of the Long Beach Health Department. So, today I will be presenting, and my name is Sabrina Sevilla Chavez, and I am a health educator with Greenlight Long Beach. And for half of our other presentation, our other health educator, whose name is Rebecca Rink, will be presenting that second half. So during our time together, we will be reviewing why we talk about impaired driving, how drugs impair our ability to drive safely, what the law says about impaired driving, and then lastly, what you can do to get home safely. So first off, I do want to emphasize that DUI doesn't just mean booze. As you will learn today, driving under the influence can happen with any drug, including prescriptions and over-the-counter medications, which brings us to our next slide. So I feel like when people hear the term driving under the influence or impaired driving, their head automatically goes to any alcohol beverages. However, these substances on this slide can also impair your ability to drive safely. So, like I mentioned, things like prescription medications or over the counter medications. And then we also have cannabis. So, drug impaired driving is an important topic to cover because it does affect millions of people. So, although cannabis is legal in California, driving under the influence is not. So, in 2021, 10,903 people were killed in drug involved traffic crashes. And just alone in California, there were 751 people killed in drug involved traffic crashes. So, also like alcohol, driving under the influence of cannabis is against the law, and you can also get a DUI because of it. So we will be starting off with talking about prescription and over-the-counter medications. So many legally obtained and commonly used over-the-counter medications can affect a person's ability to drive safely, and these medications can include things like cold and allergy medications, antidepressants, blood pressure medications, sleep aids, as well as pain relievers. And these are just a couple of medications listed. And the reason because of that is because of the side effects that these medications can have. So some of these dangerous side effects include things as having blurry vision, being dizzy or drowsy, having nausea, having an impaired concentration, or muscle weakness. So all of these, along with many others, make it dangerous to drive under while you're under the influence of these. So this is why it is illegal for you to drive while under the influence of these medications or any medications that you might be taking. So this is why we tell folks that they should talk to their healthcare provider, whether that's their doctor or their pharmacist, to see if the medications that they're taking does affect them in this way. Or you can also read that side label. If you're taking a medication, any medication should have the side effects listed on that side label. And if any of these that I listed are on there, it is not safe for you to drive while you're under the influence of them. So also something to keep in mind is that even if some medications on their own do not impair you, if you do take a second medication, or if you take that medication and then a couple hours later you drink alcohol or use cannabis, then that can cause the impairment. So definitely mixing substances is also not safe, and it's not recommended for you to do so. And we will quickly watch a video on Someone
Tiger Woods' arrest report reveals he was asleep behind the wheel of a car when he was arrested on suspicion of DUI.
And just within the past hour, we have learned that his vehicle had some sort of damage when he was found. The report says Woods was in his car with his brake lights on and a turn signal flashing. Police say they had to wake him up and that he was slurring his speech. The report also says Woods is on several prescriptions. Channel 4's Crystal Moyer spoke to a pharmacist about the dangerous side effects of some of those drugs.
Do you have any questions about your medication that I can answer for you?
Pharmacist Gary Roberts says people may not be aware of the side effects their medications can cause. Golf pro Tiger Woods blamed his DUI arrest on medications he was taking, including the painkiller Vicodin. Police found Woods asleep at the wheel Monday. His car was stopped and the engine running. Police said Woods' speech was extremely slow and slurred, and he appeared to be confused. He did take a breathalyzer, and his blood alcohol level was 0.
Those are classic examples of adverse effects of medications, especially if there's more than one medication involved.
Even ingredients in over-the-counter medications can have serious side effects. One of the most common ingredients, antihistamines. It's found in things like Benadryl and other allergy relief medications, and it can cause drowsiness. Another ingredient to look out for is dextromethorphan. Many brands will identify it with a DM on the package. Robert says it can give the sensation of being high. Be sure to also keep track of how much cold and flu medicine you're taking. Brands like NyQuil have a large amount of alcohol in it, and combining different meds can create a dangerous cocktail.
They should try to get all their medications, if they can, from the same drugstore, because that way that pharmacist knows what interacts with what.
When in doubt, ask your pharmacist or doctor about the side effects. Many of the warnings are listed right on the package.
As you can see, the top warning is may cause drowsiness.
And with so many variables, each person may have a different reaction. So Roberts suggests those taking a new drug avoid driving until they know how it will affect them.
Tiger Woods' arrest report reveals he was asleep behind the wheel of a car when he was arrested on suspicion.
So now we will be pivoting over into our cannabis section of the presentation. So before we get any further, I want to see how much you already know. So I know I can't see your guys' answers, but just I want to make sure that you guys say it to yourselves whether you think any of these scenarios are legal or illegal. So do you think driving while high is legal or illegal? What about what about if you're in a parked vehicle and you're not driving? Let's say the vehicle's either in the driveway or parked on the street. Do you think that's legal or illegal if you are using cannabis in a parked vehicle? And then next we have if you are driving the vehicle and you're not using cannabis, but the passenger is using cannabis. Do you think that's legal or illegal? And then lastly, if you do have an open container of cannabis in your car and you're driving, do you think that's legal or illegal? So if you answered illegal to all of these, you are correct. So it is not illegal to use cannabis in a car or any other vehicle, even if you are not driving. Now, the reason why it is not safe to drive while under the influence of cannabis is because of the effects that cannabis has on the brain, or its relaxation effect that it creates. So cannabis can affect your memory, your concentration, your coordination, your sensory perception, your movement, as well as it slows reaction time. And later on, we'll get into why a slower reaction time is dangerous. But it also does affect your decision making, your attentiveness, your perception of speed, and your recall as well. So something else to keep in mind is different factors that are taken into account when we're looking at how cannabis affects people. So there's 4 different factors that are taken into account. So the first one is the type of product that people use. So things like, is it dried cannabis? Is it extract? Things like that. And then also the product potency. So cannabis does have 2 main important cannabinoids found in it, which is CBD and THC. So the CBD component of it does not get a person high. However, the THC cannabinoid does get that person high, so that's the psychoactive component that is found in cannabis. So when we're talking about product potency, we're seeing how much THC is in the cannabis that someone's using. So there's things that have like 30% THC, other products that have 90% THC. So obviously the higher the percentage of THC in the product, the more it's going to affect that person and with the lower dose. Then we also have the method of consumption, which we'll get into more deeper in the next slide. And then lastly, we have the individual. So everybody's body is different. Everybody's metabolism works at different rates, but also it's important to keep in mind whether someone is a chronic cannabis user versus someone who's trying cannabis for the first time. Obviously, the person that has been using cannabis for a while will have a higher tolerance. So as I mentioned, the method of consumption, that previous slide. So we're talking about either inhalation or ingesting orally. So for inhalation, as you can see by the table, the cannabinoids that we mentioned, more so THC, enters the lungs before being absorbed into the bloodstream. So the onset can take about 10 to 15 minutes. You'll probably feel the peak around 30 minutes, and then the high can last from anywhere between 45 minutes to 3 hours. Once again, depending on all those factors we mentioned, so the person, and how much THC is in that product. And then we have the oral method, so also known as ingesting through edibles. So anything from cookies, brownies, drinks, things like that. So as you can see, this one takes a little bit more time for a person to feel that onset because the cannabinoids are broken down into in the gut, and it has to go through your whole digestive system. So it can take up to 2 hours for you to feel those effects. The peak depends on the person, and then the high, as you can see, can last way longer, so from 4 to 6 hours. And then lastly, we have topicals. So remember how I said that there was 2 cannabinoids? We went over CBD and THC. So for topicals, it's mostly common that they're just of CBD, which I mentioned is not a psychoactive component. So this cannabinoid can be absorbed through the skin. And then if you are using something with only 100% CBD, you can drive because, like I mentioned, CBD does not give that effect of being high since it's not the psychoactive component. So here are a couple other scenarios. Once again, I know I'm not there to hear your response, but if you can just think to yourselves if you think these are legal or illegal. So do you think using cannabis in a private residence is legal or illegal? Same with parks and skate parks. Do you think it's legal or illegal to use cannabis there? Or at beaches? Or dispensaries? What about at schools or public buildings? And then we have multi-unit housing as well. So this can be anything from apartments or condos in those same buildings or buildings that are close to each other. And then lastly, we have bars or clubs. Do you think using cannabis here is legal or illegal? So if you said all of them except for a private residence is legal to use cannabis, then you are correct. So technically, even though cannabis is legal, the only place that someone can legally use it is in their private residence. So nowhere in public, not even a bar or a club or the dispensaries either. And then this is also a little bit tricky because if you do live in an apartment or in a condo or even you're renting a house, let's start off with apartments and condos since they are multi-unit housing. It is illegal to use because of secondhand smoke. the smoke can easily go into the vents to the next unit. So that would be illegal to do so. And then if you are renting a house, it is important for you to ask the landlord if it is okay with them for you to smoke or use cannabis in their house, since technically the house does belong to them. So here is a myth that a lot of people believe, that they actually drive better when they're high. And the reason for this is because technically, as we mentioned earlier, cannabis does slower one's reaction time, which kind of makes the person drive slower. So as you can see, somebody who's sober has a minimal movement within the line, whereas someone who's under the influence of cannabis moves within that lane more. Also, someone who's sober has an average speed, and this is what we were talking about with if you're under the influence of cannabis, you will have a decreased speed, but you'll see where that's not always ideal in the next couple slides. We also have average risk-taking decisions as a person who is sober, but then when they're under the influence, they have those fewer risk-taking decisions as well. And then a sober person has an average following distance, whereas a person that's under the influence of cannabis will have a larger following distance between them and the car in front of them. And then a sober person has a normal reaction time, whereas a person under the influence of cannabis will have a slower reaction time. And then lastly, for a sober person, obviously collisions, there's always a possibility of getting into one. However, when you're under the influence of cannabis, there's twice as likely to happen. So we will be watching a quick video that kind of depicts a person. Well, it's not really a person, it's like a cartoon, but depicts someone under the influence of cannabis and that affecting their reaction time.
THC slows reaction time and impairs driving ability. Keep your high harmless and off the road.
Okay, so it's who saw. It's pretty obvious. At the first step, that the opportunity.
THC slows reaction time and impairs driving ability. Keep your high harmless and off the road.
Slide. Why having a normal reaction time is helpful in preventing and crash rate.
Juan was headed to work one morning when traffic stopped for an accident up ahead. Another driver decided to go for the exit instead, but someone else didn't notice until it was too late. Fortunately, it looks like the other driver braked in time to prevent the accident from being too serious, but Juan couldn't stop to check on them since he was already late for work. Juan was headed to work one morning when traffic stopped for an accident up ahead. Another driver decided to go for the exit instead, but someone else didn't notice until it was too late. Fortunately, it looks like the other driver braked in time to prevent the accident from being too serious, but Juan couldn't stop to check on them since he was already late for work.
So for this last section, I did want to go over a little on microdosing. So microdosing means consuming minimal amounts of an intoxicating substance. So this substance can be anything from like alcohol to cannabis to anything else, basically. So the reason why people microdose is to get the effects without getting too high or too drunk or feeling the effects too much. And then they also do it to maintain a functional high. But it is important to remember that if you feel different, you do drive different. So whether you're taking the most minimal amounts to feel those effects, it's still going to impair your driving. So it would still be illegal for you to drive while you're under the influence of those substances.
Next, let's talk about the effects of mixing drugs, including cannabis and alcohol. This is known as polyconsumption. It's defined as the use of more than one drug taken together, either intentionally or unintentionally. So essentially, every time someone drinks a beer and smokes a joint at the same time, they are polyconsuming. And it has become a bit normalized, so we want to ensure that everyone is aware of the physiological and behavioral impacts of combining two drugs. Using cannabis and alcohol causes increased side effects, including slowed reaction time, loss of coordination and problem-solving skills, impaired decision-making skills, and distorted perception and peripheral vision. Again, we have normalized polyconsumption with slang terms like crossfaded, but it's important to know there are a lot of variables to consider that affect your health and safety, including which one you use first. If alcohol is in your system, THC is absorbed much faster and intensifies impairment. On the other hand, using cannabis before drinking alcohol can make it difficult to gauge how intoxicated the user is from alcohol, potentially leading to dangerous situations like driving under the influence. Combining alcohol and cannabis can actually produce what's called a greenout. That refers to the experience of consuming too much cannabis, or if it's heightened by combining alcohol and cannabis. This causes symptoms such as nausea, anxiety, dizziness, and panic attacks. And lastly, not only does polyconsumption affect our health, it also affects our ability to drive safely. So if you find yourself or others saying, I can smoke and drink and be fine to drive, that is likely untrue because of the effects I mentioned 2 slides ago. The effects are slowed reaction time, loss of coordination and problem-solving skills, distorted perception of time, distance, and speed. All of those make for unsafe driving. And now we'll be moving on to the alcohol portion of this presentation. As you may know, when someone drinks an alcoholic beverage, about 20% is absorbed into the bloodstream through the stomach. The other 75% passes into the small intestine, where absorption is faster, and less than 5% leaves the body through urine or sweat. And most of the alcohol must be broken down or metabolized by the liver to remove it from the system. And that whole process happens slower than the absorption rate. So we absorb alcohol into our bloodstream faster than we metabolize it. And that whole process contributes to the BAC, or blood alcohol concentration, which is the measuring unit for impaired driving. And unlike cannabis or other drugs, for alcohol, there is a very specific definition of a DUI. It's defined as operating a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol content, BAC, greater than or equal to 0.08%. BAC can be measured by breath, blood, and urine. However, enforcement often uses breath tests or breathalyzers due to their ease of use and quick results. The BAC limit varies for numerous reasons: different licenses, age, DUI probation status, and whether you are driving a passenger for hire. However, as you can see from the chart, impairment actually begins as soon as you have a drink. Just because you do not see the visible effects of alcohol doesn't mean you aren't impaired. As your BAC rises, so does your loss of ability. It's important to remember that the definition of a drink varies. A standard drink is defined as 12 ounces of 5% alcohol beer, 5 ounces of 12% alcohol wine, or 1.5 ounces of 80 proof 40% alcohol liquor. It's important to keep in mind that not all drinks are the same even within the same categories. For example, craft beers often have more alcohol and can be served in larger glasses. Wine alcohol content varies between 5 and 23% ABV. Red wines usually have a higher alcohol content than white wines. And don't assume bartenders will always give you a 1.5-ounce shot of 40% alcohol. Some might do more. And while that all sounds like a fun time, just be aware that you may be more intoxicated than you think. So we've discussed how different alcohol types and amounts can affect your level of intoxication. What are some other factors? Well, overall, the individual is a very important factor. For example, body composition, including hormone levels, how much water you have, and body weight can affect intoxication. For example, a person who has more muscle gets intoxicated slower than someone with less muscle. Next is mood. People who are fatigued or stressed become intoxicated more quickly than people who are rested and relaxed. Next, stomach contents. Food can help absorb alcohol or simply take up space so that alcohol does not enter the blood through contact with the stomach wall. Speed of consumption, simply a person who drinks rapidly or gulps drinks becomes intoxicated faster than a person who sips or drinks slowly. Medication or drugs, not only can alcohol and drugs increase the effects of each substance, they can also trigger dangerous interactions and can cause poisoning or overdose. Lastly, carbonation plus sugars and juices also increase the rate of absorption. The pressure from carbonation in the stomach and small intestine forces alcohol to be absorbed more quickly, and the high sugar concentration in most juices accelerates stomach emptying, which means the alcohol is absorbed faster. So, different types of drinks and bodies make for different levels of impairment. But what causes this impairment? Well, alcohol is a depressant and has many effects on the brain. These effects include loss of judgment, reduced coordination, concentration, and balance, slowed reaction time, perception of speed is altered, blurry vision, memory, loss of auditory processing, and vomiting, thereby reducing the important skills you need to drive safely. Note that loss of judgment is on here, meaning it would be difficult for an intoxicated person to determine how intoxicated they are and whether they can drive safely. So it's always important to plan ahead, and we'll get into more tips towards the end of this presentation. Another myth we hear people saying is, I can sober up quickly and be okay to drive. The issue with that statement is that there's no way to speed up alcohol leaving the body. Remember what we said before, alcohol is metabolized by the liver. This happens at a very constant rate, roughly an hour per standard drink. And only about 5% of alcohol leaves the body through urine, sweat, and breathing, so the rest stays in the bloodstream until it is all metabolized. Let's do a quick knowledge check. What is the only thing that can help remove alcohol from the body? Is it A, black coffee, B, thyme, or C, fresh air? The correct answer is thyme. Black coffee or fresh air will not remove alcohol from the body, only thyme will.
So now that we finished talking about all the substances that can impair your ability to drive safely, we'll be going over DUIs and what the law says about driving under the influence. So just like drunk driving, driving under the influence of any drugs is a crime, whether those are legal drugs or illegal drugs. So this specific section 23152F of the California Vehicle Code specifically prohibits driving under the influence of any drug. So once again, that includes anything in this presentation like cannabis, alcohol, and prescription over-the-counter medications, but also keep in mind all those other illegal substances. So the California Highway Patrol does estimate a cost of a DUI to go from $13,500 to $21,000. And along with this cost are these legal consequences. So you can also get a felony or a misdemeanor. Your license can be suspended or revoked. Your vehicle can be impounded. It can also go on your criminal record and then have probation requirements as well as mandatory education classes. And then, depending on how severe that crash is, you can probably end up incarcerated in county jail or state prison. So, all these fines also do add up, which is why there's such a range going on. So, just keep in mind any vehicle towing can cost around almost $200. Booking and fingerprints, if you do go to jail, can also cost around $156. Any attorney and legal fees, if you need an attorney, can be almost $3,000. And then anything like I mentioned, if your driver's license does get revoked, you have to reinstate it. That causes a fee as well as those education classes. And then obviously your car insurance will definitely increase after a DUI. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. And then also, I want to reiterate again that driving under the influence of any illegal drugs is a crime. So even if you do have that doctor's prescription with you, If you do get stopped, it's still illegal to drive while you're under the influence, so they won't care if you do have a prescription with you or not.
Now let's discuss solutions with some alternatives to impaired driving. Another myth we hear people saying is, I drove here, so I gotta drive home. That is not true. Driving yourself home is never the only option. The best thing to do is to plan ahead. Designate a sober driver. They should be sober, not just the most sober. Plan to use rideshare or a taxi. Use Long Beach Transit, but make sure you plan your route before you start drinking or smoking. And if you have to drive, it is advised to wait 6 hours before driving after you last smoked. And if you're having edibles, wait at least 8 hours. However, note that these are estimates and not an indication that you are safe to drive. Also, note that bikes and scooters are not a safer option, and you can actually still get a DUI if you use an e bike or e scooter while impaired. And lastly, refuse to be a passenger if someone has used. Advocate for your own safety. Also, make sure to check the labels of over the counter and prescription medications. Look to see if your label cautions you about driving, operating machinery, or has any side effects such as drowsiness or nausea, which can affect your ability to drive safely. Let's do another knowledge check. Which of these is the sober or designated driver? Is it A, someone who drinks or smokes the least? E, seems unimpaired? C, stops drinking or smoking 2 hours before driving? Or D, has 0 drinks or drugs in their system? The correct answer is D. Someone who has 0 drinks or drugs in their system is the sober or designated driver. Here are a few takeaways from this presentation. It is unlawful to drive under the influence of any impairing drug. Everyday medications can be impairing, and plan ahead if you plan on using drugs or drinking any alcohol. Thank you for viewing this presentation. If you have any questions, please reach out to us by email to greenlight@longbeach.gov.